Hello everyone, and welcome back. Whether you're here to learn, to unwind, or just to drift peacefully into the distant past, you're in the perfect place. Today we're traveling back further than any campfire glow to a time when humans and our ancestors lived in total darkness once the sun went down. For nearly 3 million years, long before anyone tamed a spark, there were no flames to cook food, no warmth to chase away the cold, and no light to keep predators at bay. And yet, our ancestors survived. This isn't just a story, it's an educational journey into the earliest chapters of human evolution. We'll explore how our distant relatives lived in a world without fire, relying on raw food, natural shelters, sharp instincts, and the strength of their communities. We'll see how they endured cold nights, dangerous landscapes, and hungry predators long before the first glowing embers changed everything. From the African savannas to the dark forests of Eurasia, we'll trace the incredible resilience that carried early humans through millions of years of darkness, until that life-changing moment when fire became our greatest ally. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? We love hearing from you. It's your messages and support that keep this channel alive. You're the reason it exists, and without you, none of this would be possible. And just one quick reminder, please subscribe to the channel and like this video, because if you relax too much and drift off before the end, you might forget to do it later. Your support helps us share more peaceful, fascinating journeys through history. Now, settle in, take a deep breath, and imagine a world lit only by moonlight and stars. This is how humans survived 3 million years without fire. Millions of years ago, long before humans ever learned to spark a flame, the earth was a vast and untamed wilderness. The world was raw, shaped only by wind, water, and the restless shifting of continents. There were no glowing villages at night, no trails of smoke curling from distant hearths, only the endless expanse of forests, grasslands, and winding rivers. The earliest humans lived as part of this wild landscape, vulnerable to its dangers yet guided by its rhythms. Every sunrise brought hope and every sunset brought fear, because night meant darkness, absolute darkness, with no comforting glow of fire to hold it back. These earliest humans were not like us in every way. They were smaller, leaner, with long arms for climbing and strong hands for gripping branches. Creatures like Australopithecus roamed the edges of forests and savannas around 3 million years ago, moving on 2 feet but still at home in the trees. They didn't shape the world to fit their needs, they shaped themselves to fit the world. Their lives were not ruled by tools or technology but by instinct, awareness, and a growing intelligence that helped them survive where many other animals could not. The world they inhabited was alive with sound and danger. Herds of antelope and wild horses thundered across open plains, while huge predators, saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, and packs of hunting dogs stalked the herds from the shadows. Crocodiles lurked in rivers, ready to snatch any creature careless enough to drink without caution. Snakes hid in tall grass, and birds of prey wheeled high above, watching for movement below. For these early humans, every day meant watching, listening, and learning. A single mistake could mean death. During the day, the sun offered warmth and light, and life was full of movement. Small groups of humans traveled together, scanning the land for food. They ate what nature offered, ripe fruits hanging low from trees, fibrous roots dug from soft earth, nuts cracked open with stones, and occasionally scraps of meat scavenged from predator kills. They had no way to cook what they found, so their teeth and stomachs had to work harder than ours. Chewing tough plants for hours was normal, and raw meat, if they could get it, was stringy, hard to tear, and carried its own risks. Yet hunger taught no pride. They ate what they could, when they could. As they walked, they learned to read the language of the land. A broken branch meant another animal had passed recently. The smell of distant rain told them when water was near. Buzzing flies often marked a dead carcass, which could provide a precious meal if they arrived before larger scavengers did. Their senses were sharp in ways we can barely imagine today. Sight, sound, smell, even the feel of wind on their skin, all were tuned for survival. But as the sun sank toward the horizon, unease always grew. In the deepening dusk, colors faded and the air cooled quickly. The long shadows of trees stretched across the earth, and predators began to stir from their hiding places. There was no fire to push back the dark, no camp light to gather around for safety. Instead, these early humans relied on each other. They stayed close, speaking in soft grunts and gestures, communicating danger with a glance or a raised hand. Together they searched for safety before night truly fell, maybe a tree with strong branches, or the mouth of a cave where they could huddle out of sight. Sleep was never deep. They dozed lightly, ears alert for the crunch of approaching footsteps or the distant growl of something hungry. The darkness itself seemed alive, full of eyes that glinted in the faint moonlight. Lions patted silently through the grass, leopards slinked along tree limbs, and hyenas prowled the edges of every shadow. If a branch cracked nearby, the group would stir instantly, gripping stones or sticks to scare away attackers. Often, simply being together in a tight cluster was the best defense. A lone human was vulnerable, but a small group, alert and united, could sometimes intimidate even larger predators. The earth they walked was unpredictable, but generous. Rainstorms could sweep suddenly across the plains, soaking everything in minutes, then vanish as quickly as they came. Rivers changed their courses after heavy floods, creating new watering holes for game to gather. Seasons shifted food supplies, ripe fruits in some months, dry and scarce pickings in others, forcing humans to move constantly, following the paths of migrating animals or searching for new groves of trees. They left no permanent homes behind, only footprints and broken twigs, vanishing from a place as quickly as they had arrived. These humans had no words as we know them, yet they communicated well. They pointed out danger, shared food and comforted one another with touch and sound. Their young were cared for, not just by mothers, but by the group as a whole. A child was everyone's responsibility, because survival depended on cooperation. They learned by watching the adults gather food, climb trees, and avoid skills were passed down through imitation, not teaching, but the lessons were clear. Be watchful, stay close and trust your companions. The nights without fire were long and filled with mystery. Stars glittered above in skies far darker than we ever see now, and the Milky Way stretched bright across the heavens. Thunderstorms painted the horizon with jagged bursts of light, and sometimes wildfires sparked by lightning would rage in the distance. Early humans saw these flames from afar, perhaps in awe or fear, but they had no way to control them yet. Fire was something belonging to the world itself, a force to watch from a distance rather than a tool to claim. Despite the dangers, life was not only struggle. There were moments of rest, moments of wonder. Early humans felt the warmth of the sun on their skin, heard the music of flowing rivers, tasted sweet fruits fresh from the tree, and watched animals as curious about them as they were about the animals. They learned which trees gave shelter, which plants cured an upset stomach, and which paths led safely to water. This quiet knowledge, earned slowly, step by step, was their real strength. They survived not by fighting nature, but by living within it. Over countless generations, these humans grew wiser. Their bodies adapted to the climate, shedding heavy fur in favor of bare skin that could sweat and cool in the heat of the African savannas. Their hands became more skillful, shaping crude stone flakes to cut meat or scrape hides. Their brains grew larger, giving them the ability to remember, to plan, to cooperate in more complex ways. Though they still had no fire to warm them at night, something else was burning within them, a spark of curiosity and intelligence that no predator could match. When we imagine these distant ancestors, it's tempting to see only hardship. And yes, their lives were short, full of danger and uncertainty, but they were also resilient beyond measure. They endured cold rains and scorching suns. They crossed open plains with no map but the stars and the memory of yesterday's trail. They shared food even when there was little to share, because they understood, if only instinctively, that survival was never an individual task. It was something achieved together, as a band, as a family. This was the age before fire, when the night belonged to animals and the day belonged to those bold enough to seek food under the open sky. Every sunrise was a gift, every sunset a reminder of the darkness to come. Yet even in that darkness, humanity was being forged, not in glowing embers, but in the shared heartbeat of small groups huddled close for warmth and safety, dreaming of tomorrow under a canopy of endless stars. For millions of years, Long before fire crackled in the hands of humankind, survival meant eating the earth exactly as it offered itself. The earliest humans woke with the rising sun, hungry but without any means to soften, season or sterilize their food. What they gathered by daylight went straight from nature to their mouths, unaltered by heat, untransformed by flame. Every bite they took was raw, tough roots pulled from the ground, bitter leaves plucked from shrubs, sweet fruits snatched from overhanging branches, and when fortune allowed, slivers of meat scavenged from the kills of far stronger predators. In this raw world, food was both a blessing and a burden, providing the energy to keep moving, but demanding effort at every stage, from finding it, chewing it, to digesting it. Imagine their mornings, the grass still damp with dew, the first light spreading over endless plains. Groups of early humans, small, close-knit bands of parents, children and companions, rose from their sleeping places, still stiff from a night spent in trees or caves. Hunger was an uninvited companion, gnawing at their bellies as they set off to forage. There were no baskets to carry food, no containers to save it for later. What they found, they had to eat on the spot, or risk losing it to the ever-watchful creatures of the wild. Their diet was as varied as the land itself. In dense forests, they searched for figs, berries and nuts. In open savannas, they dug with sticks to unearth starchy tubers, their fingers caked with mud as they pulled out edible roots. They learned which plants could fill their stomachs, and which left them sick or dizzy. Bitter flavors often signaled danger, yet some bitter roots held valuable nutrients, and over time they learned how much they could safely eat. This slow trial and error process was not guided by books or teachers, only by the unforgiving lessons of nature. Those who made mistakes, who ate the wrong leaf or swallowed a poisonous seed, did not always live to pass on their knowledge. Those who chose well gave that knowledge to their children, not with words, but with watchful examples. Nuts were prized treasures, dense with calories and packed with fat, but these rewards came locked inside hard shells that tested their strength and wits. Early humans smashed them open with rocks, learning which stones broke best against which shells. This may have been one of the first sparks of tool use. Long before the first fire, long before cooking, humans learned to use the world around them to reach the food inside. The rhythmic sound of stone on shell echoed across ancient landscapes, as small hands cracked open life-saving meals. Fruits were a joy of the raw world, sweet and soft compared to roots and seeds. When fig trees or wild melons ripened, they offered brief moments of abundance. Groups would eat their fill, sticky juice running down their chins, because there was no way to preserve the harvest. Whatever nature gave, it had to be consumed before it rotted or was devoured by birds and monkeys. These feasts were fleeting, lasting only as long as the fruit on the tree. But plants alone could not provide everything the body required. Protein and fat were essential, and the earliest humans found them not by hunting, at least not at first, but by scavenging. They followed vultures circling in the distance or sniffed the air for the metallic scent of blood. When a lion pride brought down an antelope or a leopard cached its kill in the crook of a tree, humans waited for their moment. They approached cautiously, hearts pounding, scanning for danger. A bone left behind by predators might still hold precious marrow. With sharp stones chipped from riverbeds they pried it out, licking the rich fat that sustained them far longer than fruit ever could. Raw meat was not easy to eat. It was stringy, slippery, and resistant to weak jaws. Chewing took time and effort, and swallowing chunks whole could be risky. Early humans likely tore it into strips, working their teeth until the muscles ached. This hard labor of chewing shaped their faces and jaws. Compared to modern humans, they had massive molars and strong jaw muscles, adaptations that allowed them to grind fibrous plants and tough meat day after day. Their skulls grew heavy ridges to anchor these powerful muscles, and their digestive systems were robust, capable of handling microbes that would make us dangerously ill today. The act of eating in this raw world was not quick or casual. Meals were not neat portions on a plate, but continuous grazing, stretching across the day. A root found in the morning might be followed by a handful of nuts at midday, then a mouthful of bitter leaves in the afternoon. A lucky scavenging find might mean a precious strip of meat at dusk. Instead of 3 meals, they ate in many small bursts, consuming whatever they could whenever they could find it. This raw diet, shaped more than their bodies, it shaped their lives. They spent hours chewing, hours searching, hours simply processing what nature offered. Without cooking to soften food and release extra calories, early humans needed bigger teeth and stronger guts to get the same energy we receive from a single cooked meal. Much of their day was devoted simply to eating or finding food, leaving little time for anything else. Yet this was the rhythm of survival, and it worked. Over generations, their senses became finely tuned to finding nourishment. They learned to spot the telltale shine of ripe fruit high in the canopy, to smell the faint odor of tubers buried beneath the earth, to watch birds that led them to hidden fig trees. They learned which nuts were worth the effort of cracking and which would only break their teeth. This intimate knowledge of plants and animals became a kind of map in their minds, guiding them season to season, year to year, across shifting landscapes. Even without cooking, these humans grew smarter. The energy they pulled from raw meat, marrow and fat helped fuel their growing brains. A larger brain meant better memory, sharper planning, and more inventive solutions. They began to shape stones into cutting edges, not just to scavenge but eventually to hunt small animals themselves. This shift took hundreds of thousands of years, slow and steady as water carving a canyon, but it set the stage for everything to come. The raw world was not gentle. Parasites lurked in uncooked flesh. Tough plants wore down teeth until they cracked and broke. Seasons of drought brought hunger that no root or nut could satisfy. And yet, humanity endured. They endured because they learned together. They shared food rather than hoarding it. A child who couldn't chew a tough root yet could still survive because older members of the band helped feed them. Those who fell ill were protected rather than abandoned, and the knowledge they carried what to eat, where to find it, was not lost. When we look back at this time, we see a world utterly different from ours. A world without recipes, without seasoning, without even the faintest hint of firelight. But it was also a world of closeness, of constant learning, of deep connection to the land. Every plant had a meaning, every animal left a clue. Every bite of food was the result of keen observation, shared effort, and relentless determination. This was raw survival in the purest sense, not survival through domination of nature, but survival through harmony with it. These humans did not complain about their food. They did not long for cooked meals, because they could not yet imagine such a thing. They accepted what they had, and in doing so they became resourceful beyond measure. Their raw diet was not just a way to stay alive, it was a teacher, shaping their minds, bodies, and social bonds. Long before the first campfire, long before the first taste of roasted meat, humanity was being forged by the land itself. One bitter root, one sweet fig, one marrow-filled bone at a time. Long before the first spark of fire lit the darkness, our ancestors faced nights that were long, cold, and filled with unseen dangers. The sun setting was not a gentle curtain call, but a signal that the world would soon belong to predators with keener eyes and sharper claws. For early humans, survival after dusk depended on one thing above all: finding shelter. The land itself became their protector, offering caves, trees, and hidden corners where small bands could curl together and wait for dawn. This search for safety was not occasional or optional. It was as much a part of life as breathing, eating, or drinking. Without fire, the night was absolute, and the creatures who ruled it gave no mercy. Imagine a world 3 million years ago. The air smelled of rain-soaked earth and wild grasses. Herds of antelope grazed across open plains, while in the shadows, lions crouched low, patient and silent. Hyenas laughed in the distance, a chilling sound that echoed over the hills. In this ancient world, early humans were not hunters at the top of the chain, they were prey. Their bodies were small compared to the beasts that stalked them, and their teeth and claws were no match for saber-toothed cats or giant hyenas. They could not yet build walls or fences. They had no fire to keep animals at bay. What they had was a keen mind, quick feet, and a growing understanding of where the land could hide them when danger closed in. In the dense forests of East Africa, where some of humanity's earliest ancestors lived, Trees offered safety first. Much like chimpanzees today, these small, agile beings spent daylight hours moving across the ground in search of fruits, nuts, and roots. But when the light faded, they climbed. Their long arms and curved fingers wrapped securely around branches as they pulled themselves upward, far from the reach of prowling leopards or packs of wild dogs. At night they nested high in the canopy, bending leafy branches to form crude sleeping platforms. These were not permanent structures, but quickly made shelters, fresh each evening. Even without tools, they knew which branches would bear their weight, and which leaves would cushion them against the rough bark. Sleeping in trees was not comfortable by modern standards, but it was survival. As some groups of early humans began to venture more often into open woodlands and grasslands, they faced a new challenge. Trees grew farther apart, and their protection was no longer guaranteed. On these open plains, danger came from every direction. A leopard's ambush, a lion's charge, a sudden snake in the tall grass. These were constant threats. So humans turned to other shelters, caves overhanging cliffs, hollowed riverbanks, and even the dense thickets of thorny bushes. A deep cave offered cool refuge from the midday sun and protection from storms, but it also carried risk. A cave that seemed empty by day might belong to a sleeping bear, hyena, or big cat. Entering such places required caution, observation, and often group effort. Archaeologists have found traces of this early behavior, bones, and primitive tools lying in ancient cave floors, suggesting that humans sheltered there long before they tamed fire. In some cases, scattered bones show signs of predators dragging humans inside, a grim reminder that caves were not fortresses, but hiding places chosen in desperation. Yet humans learned to read signs of recent animal activity, fresh droppings, claw marks on stone, the lingering smell of a predator. Over time, they chose safer caves and learned when to move on. When caves were unavailable, nature still provided cover. Along rivers and lakes, humans crouched in reed beds, hidden by dense vegetation. On rocky hillsides, they tucked themselves into cracks and crevices, sometimes arranging fallen branches to block the view from outside. Even without building tools, they used the landscape as it was, shaping it slightly with their hands to serve their needs. They gathered fallen branches to create crude lean-tos against the wind or piled brush to make barriers against prowling animals. Thorny plants, difficult for large predators to push through, became natural walls, and humans often sought them out as protective enclosures. These shelters were not homes in the modern sense. They were temporary sanctuaries, places to endure the night rather than settle permanent. Early humans did not linger in one spot for long, because their food sources shifted with the seasons, and their scent could attract predators if they stayed too long. Instead, they developed a deep memory of the land, remembering which caves lay along their paths, which clusters of trees could hold an entire family group, which riverbanks provided both water and hiding spots. Moving constantly meant knowing the world intimately, and shelter became part of their mental map. On cool nights, these shelters were more than protection from predators. They were protection from the cold. Without fire, humans relied on the warmth of their own bodies and those of their companions. In caves or tree branches, families huddled close, children pressed between parents, bodies curled tightly to conserve heat. The absence of fire meant no glowing light to see each other's faces, only the soft sounds of breathing, the whisper of wind through leaves, and the distant calls of animals in the dark. Yet, this closeness may have strengthened bonds, because survival required cooperation. A lone human was vulnerable, but a group that watched over each other through the night could take turns resting and staying alert. Even the materials of the shelters left subtle marks on human evolution. Those who chose good hiding places survived to raise children. Those who chose poorly often did not. Over countless generations, sharp eyes, good memory, and spatial awareness became key human traits. Knowing how to move through a forest without snapping a branch or spotting the faint outline of a cave entrance at dusk became the difference between life and death. These skills shaped early humans long before tools became sophisticated. Sometimes the shelters themselves told stories. In rocky overhangs, the ground bore impressions where bodies lay night after night. In tree nests, The broken branches showed how individuals bent them for comfort. Researchers studying modern chimpanzees, who still make nightly tree nests, see echoes of these ancient behaviors. Like humans' earliest ancestors, they select strong branches, weave them into a supportive platform, and add leaves for bedding. This suggests that our forebears likely did the same for hundreds of thousands of years, gradually transitioning from full-time tree sleeping to ground shelters as their bodies became more adapted to walking upright and as their groups grew larger. The need for shelter also changed how humans moved across the land. They avoided open plains at night unless they knew of nearby cover. Migration routes often followed lines of trees, cliffs or hillsides that provided hiding spots. Even in unfamiliar territory, they sought familiar patterns, clusters of vegetation, caves with wide mouths, and good escape routes. Thickets dense enough to crawl inside, but not so dense as to trap them. This instinctive search for shelter became as natural as searching for food and water. Storms added another layer of danger. With no roofs or clothing to protect them fully, humans relied on caves, hollow trees, and natural rock shelters to escape rain and wind. Heavy downpours chilled them to the bone, and thunder sent them scurrying into whatever cover they could find. In wet seasons, high ground was preferred to avoid flooding. In dry seasons, shady shelters prevented heat exhaustion. The constant shifting between climates and landscapes taught humans adaptability. Every kind of shelter, tree, cave, thicket, hollow, was part of a survival toolkit written not on paper but in memory, shared silently from parents to children, generation to generation. As humans evolved, these shelters became more than just places to hide. They became gathering spots where groups rested, cared for their young, and watched over the old. Caves in particular offered a sense of permanence, a familiar landmark that could be returned to on long journeys. A cave was a place of safety, of shared warmth, of whispered communication in the dark. Even before language as we know it, these shelters may have been where gestures and sounds deepened into early forms of speech, because darkness forced humans to stay close and cooperate closely. Long before the first fire warmed a cave, humans were already shaping their nights around protection. The land itself was their ally, its trees and rocks providing cover, its thorny bushes serving as barriers. Their shelters were not built with tools, but chosen with intelligence and instinct. And though these refuges were simple, they worked. They kept small, fragile humans alive in a world full of teeth and claws, through countless nights when the only light came from the moon and the stars. It is humbling to imagine these scenes, a family curled together at the back of a cave, listening to the distant roar of a lion, a band of humans climbing into trees as darkness falls, weaving leafy branches into makeshift beds, a group crouched in silence within a thicket, waiting for dawn, their eyes adjusting to the faint starlight. These were not romantic nights under the open sky, but tense vigils, tests of patience and courage. Yet in passing these tests, humans grew wiser. They learned to read the land like a book, to notice patterns, to trust each other with their lives. The shelters they found, whether in trees, caves, or hidden hollows, did more than keep them safe. They shaped how humans thought, how they planned, how they bonded with one another. They were the first classrooms, where lessons of vigilance and cooperation were taught without words. And as humans slowly evolved and spread into new environments, these lessons laid the groundwork for everything to come. When the first sparks of fire finally came, when the first huts were built, it was these ancient instincts that guided the way. For millions of years before flame ever touched wood, shelter itself was humanity's only fortress against the wild. Long before humankind learned to spark flames from stone, before campfires glowed against the dark, or huts sealed in warmth, the earth itself was both cradle and adversary. Nights fell cold and heavy. Wind carried the smell of rain, frost, or distant snow. The small creatures who would one day become humans had no fire to huddle around, no fur pelts to wear, and no walls to shield them. Yet somehow they endured. Against chill and darkness they relied on their own bodies, their movement across the land, and the ancient rhythm of migration to escape death by cold. Picture the world 3 million years ago. In the highlands of East Africa, the air could drop from sun-baked heat in the day to to bone-stiffening chill at night. There were no jackets, no shelters with roofs, no glowing embers to fight the creeping cold. The earliest members of the genus Homo and their Australopithecine ancestors were lean, alert creatures, their bodies still clothed in coarse hair. This natural covering gave some protection, not the thick, insulating fur of bears or wolves, but enough to take the edge off cool air when night fell. Their bodies were not designed for icy tundra or deep glacial winters, but they could survive seasonal cold because their lives were woven tightly into the land's shifting patterns. The most ancient humans did not simply endure where they stood, they moved. The cold was never constant, and their survival instinct was to follow warmth wherever it lingered. Migration was not planned in the way modern people think of it, with maps and caravans, but it was deliberate all the same. They followed the herds of grazing animals, who themselves sought greener pastures when frost settled on the grass. They followed rivers to lower valleys where water ran unfrozen. They learned, without formal teaching, to descend from wind-swept plateaus when temperatures dropped, and to return only when the air grew mild again. Their migrations were not once-a-year affairs but ongoing, woven into their search for food and safety. The very shape of human life, nomadic, restless, always seeking, was shaped by the cold pressing them onward. But movement alone was not enough. At night, when their bodies slowed and their muscles stilled, the cold seeped into their bone. It is here that their most ancient adaptations saved them, covered with a thicker layer of body hair than we now possess. Early humans had natural insulation. Beneath the skin, fat provided additional warmth, though leaner than that of cold-weather animals. Some anthropologists believe that as humans evolved, they lost much of this insulating hair, trading fur for sweat glands that allowed better cooling while running in hot climates. But 3 million years ago, our ancestors still wore a primitive coat. It was not luxurious, not protective against deep frost, but it kept the chill from biting too quickly, buying precious hours of survival before dawn. When even body hair could not fully guard them, they used each other. Families and small bands of humans slept in tight clusters, pressing skin to share heat. Infants and children were held in the center, shielded by the warmth of parents and older siblings. This habit, simple yet profound, was more than just instinct. It was social glue. Through endless cold nights, physical closeness taught trust. A lone human shivering on the ground might not see morning, but a group curled together in a shallow depression, wrapped in leafy bedding, could weather even a stiff wind. The earliest humans likely huddled much like modern primates do in treetop nests, using their bodies as blankets, breathing warmth into one another's necks as they slept lightly, always half aware of the dangers in the dark. Sometimes they used the land itself as protection from the cold. When temperatures dropped sharply after sunset, they curled against rock faces that absorbed the day's warmth or pressed into shallow caves and overhangs to block the wind. They gathered dry leaves, grasses, and moss to build soft layers beneath them, preventing heat loss to cold ground. Even without tools to cut or bind, they knew how to choose the right bedding materials, ones that stayed dry, trapped air, and offered some insulation. This knowledge was passed without words, by simple imitation. Young ones learned by watching their elders smooth leaves into a nest-shaped bed, or gather armfuls of dry grass to cover exposed ground. In harsher regions where cold was persistent rather than occasional, migration became even more vital. Early humans avoided high mountain ridges and barren tundras, unless food absolutely forced them to cross. They followed valleys where rivers stayed liquid through the seasons, and moved toward coastal areas where the climate was softened by the sea. When ice ages later gripped the earth, humans who had not yet mastered fire survived only by relentless movement, and by selecting the right environs, avoiding the worst of the cold rather than standing against it. They traveled light, always prepared to abandon a region when frost began to bite too hard. Though they lacked fire, their brains gave them an advantage no animal fur could match. Foresight. Early humans began to recognize subtle signs of seasonal change. The angle of the sun, the smell of dry air, the migrations of birds. When herds started to drift south, humans followed, knowing instinctively that cold would soon descend. Their survival depended on reading the world like an open book, learning to anticipate rather than simply react. This ability to predict allowed them to arrive in warmer lands before the worst of winter arrived, sparing them from nights that might otherwise have claimed their lives. The cold also shaped their bodies. Over thousands of generations, those who survived were those whose physiques could adapt. Humans living in cooler climates developed stockier frames, shorter limbs, and broader noses to conserve heat, while those closer to the equator stayed lean and long-limbed to shed warmth efficiently. These patterns, still visible today, began in this age before fire. Even hairiness varied. Populations in colder places likely retained thicker body hair longer, while those in hotter areas shed it more quickly. The cold was a sculptor, shaping the human form itself, deciding which traits would be carried forward into the future. Hunger often worsened the chill. Without cooked food to provide quick calories and warm bellies, early humans relied on raw fruits, nuts, roots, and scavenged meat. Fat-rich foods, precious and rare, provided warmth from within when eaten, giving the body more energy to burn against the cold. In lean times, when food was scarce, their bodies slowed, conserving heat by reducing movement and huddling together more tightly. Sleep itself was lighter, more broken, because shivering was often their only defense against hypothermia. Yet, despite all these hardships, they endured. Fossil evidence shows that humans and their close relatives occupied environments that swung between wet and dry seasons, warm days and bitter nights. Ancient footprints found at Lake Oli in Tanzania and tool sites in the Afar region of Ethiopia tell us that early humans walked the land through periods of cooling climate. Even without fire, they expanded their range, proving they could survive far from the equatorial heat by using mobility, cooperation, and the modest protection of their own hair-covered bodies. The fight against cold was not always desperate. In some regions, the natural world provided warmth in subtle ways. Dense forests held heat better than open plains. Rocky overhangs, warmed by the sun, released their stored heat slowly at night. Even shallow burrows dug not by humans but by other animals offered a little relief from freezing wind. Humans who discovered such places remembered them, returning to familiar hollows and caves whenever the cold returned. These small sanctuaries became part of the mental map passed from one generation to the next, a shared memory of safe places in a dangerous world. It's not difficult to imagine a small band of humans, the sun setting behind distant hills, the air cooling quickly as long shadows stretch across the savannah. They tighten the hides of fruit they carry, glance nervously at the horizon, and begin moving toward a stand of trees where they once spent a night sheltered from the wind. A mother carries her child on her hip, her mate breaking branches to weave a soft bed high in the branches. Older children follow closely, helping gather leaves. As stars pierce the sky, they curl together in their leafy nest, body against body, the warmth of the group warding off the creeping chill. Below them, unseen in the dark, predators move silently, noses twitching in the cold air, but the family sleeps on, safe enough to survive until dawn. In this world, every cold night was a lesson. Humans learned to read the ground, to follow warmth, to recognize danger before it arrived. They learned that strength lay not in the individual, but in the group, in shared warmth and shared movement. These lessons were etched deep into human nature, long before fire ever glowed against stone walls. When humans eventually did learn to keep and make fire, it was a revolution, but it was built upon countless generations who had already mastered survival by other means. The instinct to migrate with the seasons, to huddle for warmth, to choose favorable ground. These habits remained, even when flames later made the night less fearful. The cold, in its quiet, merciless way, shaped humanity. It taught caution and planning. It honed physical endurance. It bound families closer, because survival depended on touch, cooperation, and shared vigilance. And in shaping these traits, the cold prepared humans for the moment they would finally seize control of heat itself. Fire would one day banish the darkness. But before that triumph, humanity proved something deeper, that they could endure without it. Before humankind held fire in their hands, the night belonged to others. The darkness was alive with sound. The coughing call of lions, the low growl of leopards, The distant laugh of hyenas. For millions of years, humans and their ancestors were not the hunters they would later become, but prey who had to endure, adapt, and outthink animals far stronger than themselves. To survive in a world of teeth and claws without fire's bright shield, they turned to the oldest weapons of all, their hands, their minds, the earth beneath their feet, and the safety of the group. Imagine the savannas of Africa, 3 million years ago. The grasslands stretched in every direction, broken only by scattered acacia trees, rocky outcrops and narrow rivers glinting in the sun. When daylight waned and the air cooled, the great cats began to stir. These predators did not see humans as warriors or rivals. They saw them as weak, slow-moving animals with tender flesh. A solitary human on the plain would not last long, but humans were rarely solitary. They lived in tight bands, bound by necessity. As the sun set, families drew closer, talking in low tones, ears sharp for rustling grass or distant footsteps. The very fact that humans stayed together after dark was one of their first and greatest defense. A single body was fragile, but a cluster of them, alert and coordinated, could confuse or drive off even fearsome hunters. They had no spears yet, no metal blades, no sharpened points hardened in fire, but they had stirred. Rocks of every size littered the ground, and our ancestors learned quickly that these were more than just obstacles underfoot. A rounded stone fit well in the palm, and when thrown with force it could stun, break bone, or at least startle a predator long enough to escape. Archaeological sites such as those at Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania reveal collections of stones that were carried from elsewhere, suggesting that early humans deliberately gathered and kept throwable weapons. This was no accident. Carrying stones was a choice, a decision made long before humans had words to describe it. It marked the beginning of intentional defense. Alongside stones there was stick. A fallen branch or heavy limb was not only a tool for digging up roots or knocking down fruit from trees, but also a crude club. Early humans surely saw how even a waving branch could frighten animals. Hyenas and wild dogs, emboldened by numbers, might creep close, but a sudden show of aggression, a raised stick, loud cries, and a charge could send them scattering. Fossil evidence shows that human ancestors like Australopithecus, Afarensis, and Homo habilis were not especially large or strong, but their arms were built for swinging and throwing. Those who used branches and stones effectively would have been more likely to survive, passing on both their physical strength and their instinct for fighting back. Yet it was not only physical tools that kept them alive, it was cleverness. Long before fire, humans learned to watch predators carefully, to read their movements, to understand when they hunted and when they rested. They tracked lions from a distance, noted where leopards dragged kills up into trees, and avoided game trails where ambushes might occur. Knowledge itself was a shield, built slowly generation by generation. An elder who remembered where the hyenas denned, or when crocodiles lay waiting by the riverbank, could guide their group away from danger. This careful observation was another kind of weapon, invisible, silent, and just as vital as a stone in hand. When danger did appear suddenly, humans did not scatter in panic, they faced it together. Fossil and behavioral studies of primates like chimpanzees, our living cousins, offer clues to how early humans behaved. Modern chimps will mob a leopard if it threatens their group, screaming, throwing branches and charging in unison to drive it off. Early humans almost certainly did the same. This is the heart of defense without fire, not strength of body, but strength in numbers, the courage that comes when fear is shared and turned outward rather than inward. In a clash between one predator and one human, the predator wins. In a clash between a predator and 10 humans working as one, the outcome is very different. The night was still dangerous, of course. There were times when predators won. Fossilized bones from early human sites bear the puncture marks of big cat teeth, but each loss was a lesson. Over time, humans learned to choose sleeping spots more carefully. They avoided low, open ground where lions could creep up unnoticed. They climbed trees, making leafy nests, like their primate ancestors. Where few ground predators could reach, they learned to rest near rocky cliffs or water edges, where surprise attacks were harder. These choices were not random. They were strategies, refined through experience and memory. The group that chose the right sleeping ground lived to see the next day, while a careless group vanished, leaving only bones. Some of the oldest archaeological discoveries hint at how these strategies evolved. In places like Dmanisi in Georgia, where humans spread into Eurasia nearly 2 million years ago, fossils show a mix of prey and predator remains together. This suggests that humans were living in environments where they constantly overlapped with dangerous animals, saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, and wolves. Without fire, their survival depended on constant vigilance, on the ability to defend themselves even as strangers in new and hostile lands. They brought their tools and habits with them, gathered stones, sturdy branches, and close cooperation. Even during daylight, predators were a threat. Leopards hunted in the early morning and evening, stalking humans just as they stalked antelope, but humans were becoming more agile, better runners, and more coordinated. If a predator attacked, they responded with noise, shouts, claps, thrown rocks, turning their small size into an illusion of greater strength. This strategy works even today. Many traditional societies still drive off lions or hyenas with loud group displays, showing that this ancient trick never lost its power. In the absence of fire, humans also used deception. They may have carried bones or skulls to make rattling sounds, or stripped branches to wave like spears. Some anthropologists suggest they left collections of stones at favored sleeping spots, a primitive form of arming themselves in advance. Others believe they kept watch in turns, posting sentinels at night who could alert the group to danger. This kind of organization speaks to the developing human mind, a species that didn't just react to threats but planned for them. It is important to remember that humans were not always at war with predators. Sometimes they followed them. Large carnivores left behind scraps of meat after a kill, and humans armed with stones to crack bones and sticks to fend off scavengers learned to move in once the hunter was gone. But approaching a lion's kill was risky. To survive, humans had to gauge when it was safe and when the predator might return. This delicate dance sharpened their senses, made them more alert, more attuned to the rhythms of other creatures. Defending themselves was not always about fighting. It was just as often about timing and caution. All of these habits, carrying stones, wielding sticks, sleeping close together, choosing defensible ground, and watching the world with sharp eyes, laid the groundwork for humanity's later dominance. When fire finally came, it added light and heat to these same strategies, but the mindset was already there. Humans already knew how to stand together, how to protect the weak, how to turn fear into coordinated action. Fire simply made their weapons stronger. We can imagine a scene from those long nights. Long before flame, a small band settles near a rocky outcrop. The sun dips low, and they gather a rind of stones in their hands, the larger ones laid at the edge of their nest of leaves. They speak in quiet grunts and gestures, the meaning clear. Stay close, be ready. A rustle in the tall grass brings every head up at once. Eyes shine in the dusk. A lioness, cautious but curious. The humans rise together, shouting, throwing the first rocks, brandishing branches high over their heads. The lioness hesitates. These creatures are small, weak-looking, but they do not run. They are loud, united, and strange. She decides to move on. The group settles again, hearts pounding but alive. Tonight they have won, not by strength or fire, but by courage and cleverness. Night after night, generation after generation, these moments accumulated into instinct. Humans became the animal that refuses to go quietly, the fragile creature that survives through wit, cooperation, and tools plucked straight from the earth. Defending against predators was never easy, but it was possible, and it shaped the human spirit long before the first spark of fire, long before humans tamed fire, long before they could carve spears or chip stone blades with precision. They had each other. Life was harsh on the open savannas, where great predators hunted by day and night, and food was scattered across wide, unforgiving land. Alone, a human was fragile, slow, small, and vulnerable to nearly every danger. But together, something remarkable happened. Weakness turned into strength, fear became courage, and scattered voices formed a chorus of survival. Imagine a band of early humans, perhaps 24 individuals, wandering across a grassy plain 3 million years ago. The air is cool in the morning, the sun still low on the horizon, and the group moves in a loose formation. Adults walk on the edges, scanning for danger. Children and elders stay near the center. There is no leader in the modern sense, but there is an unspoken rhythm, a shared understanding that comes from living so close, day after day. Their communication is not words as we know them, not yet, but calls, gestures, expressions, and the subtle language of glances. When one points to the ground, the others gather to look a fresh paw print in the dirt, warning of lions nearby. When a figure at the back of the band stiffens, others turn their heads without a sound. This silent coordination keeps them alive. Anthropologists believe early humans, even before fire, had a rich capacity for vocalization and body language. They may not have had structured grammar, but they shared meaning through tone and rhythm, through the rise and fall of sound that signaled danger, discovery, or reassurance. Primates today, chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, still communicate with dozens of calls, each suited to a different threat or opportunity. Our ancestors would have done the same, and perhaps even more, refining their signals as their brains grew larger and more capable of memory. Cooperation began with food. Gathering roots, fruits and nuts was safer when many eyes watched for snakes and leopards. Some individuals climbed trees to shake loose figs while others waited below to collect them. When carcasses of dead animals were found, either left by predators or animals that died of natural causes, groups approached cautiously. The smell of fresh meat drew competitors, hyenas, vultures, and jackals, but a united band of humans could sometimes drive scavengers off with shouts and stones, claiming a meal of marrow-rich bones or tender scraps of flesh. A lone human would have been chased away instantly, but many humans together created confusion and noise, tipping the balance in their favor. As the sun set, the value of cooperation became even clearer. Nights were terrifying. Without fire, darkness belonged to the hunters. But humans developed ways to lessen the danger. They slept close together in caves, beneath overhangs, or in nests of branches in the trees. Some likely stayed awake in shifts, keeping watch while others rested. Fossil sites show repeated use of certain locations, suggesting humans returned to safe spots over and over, improving them each time. Perhaps stones were piled to make an entrance harder to cross, or thorny branches were arranged to discourage prowling predators. None of these defenses would work without group effort, without a shared willingness to guard one another. This instinct to protect, even at personal risk, was one of humanity's first great strengths. A predator might snatch a weak or young individual if the group scattered in panic. But when the group stood its ground, shouting, waving arms, hurling sticks and stones, predators sometimes backed down. Those humans who cooperated survived more often than those who fled alone. Over many generations, this shaped both behavior and biology. Evolution favored individuals who paid attention to others, who cared about group safety, who could read intentions and share them. The roots of empathy, loyalty, and even morality may stretch back to those long, fireless nights when survival depended on unity. Cooperation wasn't just about defense. It made humans better at finding and sharing food. A mother with a child could not wander far to gather roots, but others in the group could bring food to her. An injured man who could not climb could still crack nuts with stones or scare off scavengers with noise, contributing in a different way. This flexibility meant fewer individuals were abandoned. Fossils from sites like Dimanasi, dating to nearly 1.8 million years ago, show individuals who survived long after losing teeth, proof that others must have shared food with them because they could no longer chew tough raw meat or fibrous plants on their own. Such care for the weak and old would have been impossible without strong social bonds. Teamwork also shaped the way humans moved. Groups learned to travel in patterns that balanced safety and resources. When water was scarce, they remembered where distant streams or seasonal pools lay. When fruit trees ripened, they led the way to familiar groves. Knowledge was not locked in one brain, but spread among many. If an elder died, the group still retained its collective memory of the land, its trails and its dangers. Even without formal language, communication could be surprisingly rich. A sharp cry could mean leopard in the grass, while a softer grunt might mean food ahead. A raised arm could signal others to stop. A rhythmic tapping of stones might gather scattered foragers back to the main band. These simple signals were the beginning of human culture, shared patterns of meaning that no single animal could invent alone. This cooperative spirit extended to hunting long before spears and traps. Early humans were not powerful hunters at first, but they were persistent. Working together, they could chase small animals, or corner them in rocky gullies, using stones to kill them. Later, as brain size increased, this same teamwork evolved into organized persistence hunting. Groups would track antelope or zebra for hours, taking turns chasing until the exhausted animal could no longer flee. But even before such a sophistication, the seeds were there. Humans who worked together could do what no single individual could dream of. It's worth picturing an ordinary day. A group moves through tall grass under a blazing sun. One woman notices a patch of edible tuber. She signals with a whistle-like call. Others join, digging with sticks and bare hands, unearthing the nutritious roots. Suddenly, a rustling sound comes from the edge of the clearing. A young man gestures sharply, pointing. The band freezes. A spotted shape crouches low, a leopard, waiting for someone to wander close. At once, the humans rise together, shouting in unison, brandishing sticks overhead to appear larger, and throwing stones with practiced aim. Surprised by the sudden wave of aggression, the leopard retreats into the brush. The humans breathe out, gather their food, and move on. No single person planned this defense. It flowed naturally from living side by side, from knowing each other's signals and trusting them. Over generations, such episodes wove an invisible net of understanding. Individuals began to anticipate what others would do, to read moods and intentions in faces and gestures. Children grew up imitating adults, learning when to sound an alarm, when to join a chase, when to share food. This shared knowledge was passed on, not through words carved in stone but through daily life itself. In this way, culture existed before language, and language slowly grew out of culture. Cooperation also brought emotional rewards, just as modern humans feel safer in a crowd. Early humans must have felt reassurance in the company of others. A watchful glance, a warning call, a shared laugh after danger passed. All these moments strengthened bonds. Living close required patience and tolerance, qualities that made survival easier. Groups that fought constantly or abandoned members would not endure as long as groups that supported each other. Natural selection favored the social. In times of scarcity, this meant sharing. A lone human might hoard food, but in a tight-knit band, food passed from hand to hand. When children were hungry, multiple adults helped feed them. When someone fell ill, others slowed the pace or carried burdens for them. Fossil evidence suggests that cooperative child rearing, where not only parents but other adults and older siblings helped care for the young, has deep roots in human history. This system allowed mothers to recover faster, infants to survive longer, and knowledge to be spread across many caregivers. Such deep cooperation changed the way humans saw each other. They were not just individuals, but parts of a whole. When danger came, they did not see only themselves at risk. They saw the band as something worth protecting. This may have been the earliest form of human identity. Not I, but we. That sense of belonging carried humans through long ages of darkness and cold. By the time fire was finally tamed, humans had already become masters of collective survival. Fire gave them warmth, light, and better weapons. But the habits of cooperation were older than flame. Those habits were written into human nature by countless nights huddled together, countless alarms raised and answered, countless meals shared under a moonlit sky. Even today, our instinct to form groups, to look after family and friends, to rally together in crisis, echoes those ancient bands on the savannah. Picture a final scene, dusk falling over an African plain, 2 million years ago. The humans settle near a ridge where thorn bushes grow thick. They arrange the branches around their sleeping place, creating a crude wall. Adults with strong arms gather rocks to keep by their sides. Children curl against mothers. A few young men and women sit awake as night deepens, watching the horizon. Their ears catch every sound. The distant roar of lions, the whisper of wind through grass. One of them hears movement too close for comfort, and gives a low warning cry. Instantly, the group stirs. Stones are gripped, sticks are raised. The sound fades, Perhaps it was only a hyena passing by, but no one takes chances. Hours later, dawn arrives with its soft golden light. They are alive again. Not because they were the fastest or strongest, but because they stayed together, trusted one another, and refused to face the night alone. This was the power of cooperation. It needed no fire, no language, no tools sharper than a stone or branch. It was a quiet force that shaped humanity long before history began, a shared heartbeat in the dark, a promise that as long as they stood side by side, they had a chance to see another sunrise. The world 3 million years ago was vast and unpredictable, with no roads, no maps, and no permanent shelters to tame it. The earliest humans lived as wanderers, following the rhythms of nature because they had no choice. The Earth was entering cycles of cooling and warming, long ice ages punctuated by warmer intervals. Grasslands spread across Africa, forests thinned, and great herds of animals roamed in search of grazing lands. For our ancestors, life was a constant lesson in reading the land, knowing where to go, when to leave, and how to survive in places that offered little comfort. Those who learned to move with the seasons lived. Those who stayed still often perished. Imagine a small band of early humans waking at dawn on an open plain in East Africa. The air is cool, carrying the smell of distant rain. They've spent the night in a shallow gully, lined with thorny branches to keep hyenas away. Food nearby has grown scarce, and the fruit trees they relied on last week are stripped bare. They have to move again. This is not aimless wandering. Over generations, they've learned where to go when the dry season burns the grass to dust, and where to return when the rains make the land bloom. No one carries a written record, yet the paths are remembered in muscle, memory, and story. Elders recall distant rivers and groves, the feel of certain stones underfoot, the slope of hills that shelter from the wind. Moving with the seasons meant more than following food. It meant escaping deadly cold or crushing heat. Even in Africa, nights could be bitter in highlands or during long dry spells when the wind stripped warmth from the skin. These humans had no fire yet, no furs stitched into clothing, no tents to block the wind. They used their own bodies to adapt, huddling close at night, finding caves or rocky overhangs, bedding down in piles of leaves and grass. But the greatest adaptation was mobility itself. When a place grew too cold, too dry, or too empty of food, they left. They walked, often for days or weeks, guided by an instinctive understanding of the land that came from living so close to it. Their movements followed invisible maps. Rivers carved lifelines through the savannah, attracting both animals and plants. When waterholes dried up, humans traced riverbeds upstream, where springs still trickled, or they followed migrating herds whose instincts led to better grazing. The people learned to recognize the flight of birds overhead, which hinted at distant water. They watched the growth of certain flowers or grasses as signs of seasonal change. In this way, nature itself became their compass and calendar. The harshest climates demanded even more ingenuity. In drier seasons, food was scarce, and humans relied on hard, fibrous roots buried deep in the ground. These were bitter and tough but edible when nothing else was available. They learned to crack nuts, pound seeds, and scrape marrow from bones left by predators. This flexibility of diet made them better travelers than many other animals. Where a grazing herd might starve when the grass dried, humans could dig, scavenge, and gather enough to keep going. Their ability to eat many different foods, raw plants, fruits, roots, nuts, insects, shellfish near rivers, was itself a form of climate adaptation. But moving constantly was not without danger. Traveling exposed humans to predators, rival groups, and the uncertainty of new terrain. They had to know where to find shelter each night. A familiar cave used last year might now be home to leopards or hyenas. A riverbank remembered for its fish might be dry or patrolled by crocodiles. The landscape itself could change. Floods shifting the courses of streams, fires clearing whole valleys. Humans survived because they did not cling stubbornly to one place. They read the signs of change and adjusted. This constant movement also shaped the body. Long limbs, efficient sweating, and the ability to walk great distances without overheating made early humans masters of endurance. While other animals panted and rested in the heat, humans could keep going, step after steady step, crossing miles of open ground to reach better lands. This nomadic way of life forged resilience, teaching people to rely on memory, cooperation, and keen observation rather than comfort or tools. Imagine the dry season tightening its grip. The grass turns brittle and yellow, rivers shrink to narrow ribbons of muddy water, and animals grow thin. A band of humans leaves its familiar valley, guided by a mother who remembers a stream 2 days' walk away. Children stumble from thirst, but the adults carry them in turns, sharing the burden. Along the way, they pass carcasses picked clean by vultures, reminders that not every journey ends well. At night, they huddle in a grove of acacia trees, taking turns to watch for danger. By morning, they move again, following the scent of rain on the wind. When at last they reach the remembered stream, now swollen from distant storms, the relief is profound. They drink deeply, gather berries along the banks, and watch the herds return. This victory over climate was not won with weapons or fire, but with memory, endurance, and shared purpose. Seasonal movement also created patterns in human life. Groups returned to certain places again and again, a rocky hill where fruit ripened at the same time each year, or a sheltered basin where antelope gathered. Over generations, trails formed across the land, not as roads but as faint traces in the mind. These were the first migration routes, passed down through observation rather than maps. When new generations followed old paths, they carried the wisdom of those before them. In this way, even without permanent homes, humans had a sense of place. Climatic challenges came not just from cold or heat, but from sudden shifts. Heavy rains could flood low ground, forcing a quick move to higher ridges. Droughts could linger longer than expected, sending humans into unfamiliar regions where they encountered strange plants, new animals, and sometimes rival bands of their own kind. Such encounters could lead to conflict, but also to exchange knowledge of water sources, edible roots, or safe shelters. This flow of information between groups was as important as the flow of water through rivers. It allowed human understanding of the land to spread faster than any one group could discover it alone. Some climates were so harsh that humans visited them only briefly. High mountain valleys, for instance, were cold at night and thin of oxygen. But they sometimes offered rich hunting during certain seasons. Humans learned to enter, take what they needed, and leave before the weather turned deadly. In coastal areas, tides and storms posed other dangers, but also brought shellfish and crabs that could be gathered by hand. By moving constantly between these different environments, grassland, forest edge, riverbank, coast, humans became generalists, prepared for almost anything. Consider a winter's evening on a high plateau 2 million years ago. The wind cuts like a knife and frost gathers on the ground. The humans here cannot make fire, yet they survive by choosing their sleeping place carefully. They tuck themselves into a rock cleft shielded from the wind, lying close together to share body heat. The youngest are held between adults, safe and warm. In the morning the band descends to lower ground, where sunlight warms the air and edible shoots push through the soil. By always moving between zones of danger and zones of safety, they adapt not by changing the world around them, but by changing where they are. This nomadic existence shaped not only the body but also the mind. To survive, humans had to remember landmarks, track the passing of seasons, and anticipate the behavior of animals. They learned to recognize distant cloud formations as signs of coming rain, to notice when certain flowers bloomed as signals that fruit would soon ripen. These observations became a living calendar, guiding when to leave, when to stay, and when to return. Unlike many animals bound by instinct alone, humans built knowledge that could be shared and taught. A child walking beside her mother learned to read the earth as surely as we learn to read a book today. Even without fire or permanent tools, humans found ways to exploit the land's gifts. Warm springs offered shelter from cold, dense thickets shielded from wind. South-facing slopes gathered more sunlight and stayed warmer in the morning, while north-facing ones held precious shade during the hottest hours. The people who noticed these details lived longer and passed their awareness on. Over many generations, climate movement shaped human society in subtle ways. Constant travel required small, flexible groups. Too many people would deplete food too quickly, but too few would be vulnerable to predators. Groups had to cooperate, deciding together when to leave and where to go. Disputes threatened survival, so individuals who could mediate, calm tempers, or persuade others became valuable. These were the earliest roots of leadership, not command by force, but guidance through trust. Climate also shaped human migration beyond Africa. As populations grew and food competition increased, some bands ventured into new territories, following rivers northward or eastward. They tracked game into lands with colder winters and shorter growing seasons, learning to seek valleys where warmth lingered or coasts where fish were plentiful. These movements set the stage for humanity's eventual spread across the globe. Above all, adapting to harsh climates meant learning humility. Humans could not yet control their world. They could only respond to it. When rains failed, they moved. When winds grew bitter, they sought shelter. When predators hunted the same watering holes, they traveled in larger groups for protection. This flexibility was a quiet triumph, laying the foundation for everything humans would achieve later. It taught them to notice patterns, to think ahead, to share knowledge, traits that would one day allow them to harness fire, build tools, and eventually reshape entire landscapes. Picture a final journey. The air smells of dust as the dry season deepens. A band of humans walks single file across the plain, scanning for distant trees or glints of water. Their feet are tough, their strides unbroken by fatigue. When the sun sets, they bed down in a sheltered hollow, pressing close for warmth. In the morning they rise and move again, guided by memory and instinct, toward a distant valley where they know food will be waiting. They have no fire to light their path, no clothes to block the wind, no permanent home to rest in. Yet they endure because they have learned the oldest human lesson of all. Survival comes not from conquering the land, but from listening to it, following its rhythms, and moving in harmony with its changing face. The story of humanity begins long before the first spark of fire, long before stone tools grew sharp enough to shape the world. It begins with small, upright apes wandering the forests and savannas of Africa, living not by controlling their environment, but by adapting to it. Over millions of years, our ancestors walked a long road of evolution, shaped not by sudden revolutions, but by patient, relentless change. Their bodies and minds were sculpted by hunger, cold nights, predators, and endless days spent searching for food under the unforgiving sun. What seems to us now like deprivation was their entire reality, and every challenge they faced pressed upon them the slow weight of natural selection. Only those who could endure without cooked food, without warmth, without light except the stars and moon, left descendants to carry their story forward. In the beginning, these early humans were more like shadows of what we recognize today. They lived in small, scattered bands, gathering fruits, leaves, seeds and roots, tearing flesh from carcasses abandoned by lions and hyenas. Without fire, every meal was raw. Their jaws were massive, their teeth thick and flat for grinding fibrous plants, their faces projecting forward with heavy ridges to anchor powerful chewing muscles. The energy they consumed came in bursts from berries, from tough roots dug with bare hands, from marrow sucked out of cracked bones. Their stomachs worked harder than ours, filled with microbes to break down food that modern humans could barely stomach. Everything in their biology was tuned for survival without cooking. Yet nature does not stand still. Over hundreds of thousands of years, small changes in climate reshaped the landscape, and small changes in behavior reshaped the body. As forests gave way to open grasslands, our ancestors spent less time climbing trees and more time walking on two legs. Their spines straightened, their hips narrowed, and their legs grew longer. They could walk and run for hours without tiring, following wounded prey or distant water sources under the blazing sun. Standing upright exposed less of their body to heat and freed their hands to carry food, dig with sticks or hold crude stones. This simple shift, walking tall, transformed the way humans interacted with the world, and it was driven entirely by survival in environments where no comforts existed, no fire to warm the nights, no cooked meal to soften their diet. Brains too began to grow, but not all at once. Early humans had to become clever just to live another day. They needed to remember where fruit ripened, where water still flowed when the land dried, which plants healed the stomach and which poisoned it. They needed to outwit faster, stronger predators by watching, waiting, and choosing the right moment to scavenge or flee. Each advantage in memory or planning allowed them to bring back food more reliably, to protect their young better, to survive long enough to reproduce. Slowly, generation after generation, those with slightly sharper minds, slightly quicker hands, left more children behind. The road of evolution has no single leap forward, only steps so small they are almost invisible, until, millions of years later, you can see how far those steps have gone. Living without cooked food shaped the entire human digestive system. Raw meat and tough plants required powerful jaws and large guts to process. Early humans spent much of their day chewing, hours at a time, grinding fibrous leaves and roots to pulp. Their bellies were round and full of digestive organs that consumed much of their energy. Over time, however, our ancestors began to favor richer foods, scavenging marrow and fat, seeking softer fruits, cracking nuts for their dense calories. This shift reduced the need for such a massive gut, and energy that once went to digestion could be reallocated. Slowly, brains expanded, even as faces flattened and jaws shrank. It was an extraordinary trade-off written in bone and muscle, less brute force in chewing, more subtlety in thinking. They did all this without ever tasting cooked food, proving that the human brain began its great expansion long before the first hearth glowed. Artificial light never guided these early humans. They rose with the sun and rested when it set, their bodies ruled by the rhythms of daylight and darkness. Nights were long and dangerous, filled with the eyes of prowling cats and the rustle of unseen movement. Humans had to learn to rely on each other, taking turns to watch while others slept. Their senses sharpened to the faintest sounds. Their internal clocks, circadian rhythms, evolved to sync perfectly with the natural cycle of dawn and dusk. Unlike us, they never fought against darkness with lamps or torches. They accepted it, huddling less for safety and warmth. Those who feared the night and stayed cautious were more likely to survive. Those who were reckless, wandering too far after sunset, were more likely to vanish into a predator's jaws. Fear itself became an evolutionary tool, guiding humans toward habits that preserved their lives. The long road of evolution also hardened the body against cold, hunger, and thirst. Before fire, humans could not rely on warmth except from each other. Their bodies were covered in thicker hair than ours, their skin tougher to withstand the elements. They learned to keep moving, to generate heat through effort, to migrate when conditions grew too harsh. Those with better fat storage or greater stamina survived when food was scarce. A single dry season might kill many, but those with a knack for endurance, who could walk farther, who could go longer without eating, who could sleep under the stars without succumbing to frost, carried humanity forward. Every winter night without fire carved strength into the lineage. Their brains did not only grow in size, they grew in complexity. The ability to cooperate, to share food, to warn others of danger, became as important as strong arms or fast legs. Humans who worked together survived predators better than those who wandered alone. Over time, communication evolved from gestures and cries into proto-language, sounds with shared meaning that could be passed from parent to child. This was not simply culture, it was biology shaping behavior, and behavior shaping biology. Those who could understand each other's calls, who remembered shared paths and taught them to their young, had a survival edge. The brain adapted not just to finding food, but to living socially, to thinking about the minds of others. This slow evolution did not happen in one place alone. Different groups of humans spread out, facing different challenges. In wetter regions they relied on fruits and leaves, in drier ones, on roots and scavenged meat. Each environment left its mark on the body. Some populations grew stockier to conserve heat, others grew lean and long-limbed to shed it. Yet the shared thread was adaptability. Wherever they went, humans survived without altering the land. No fire to clear brush, no shelters to shield against wind, no lamps to light the darkness. They altered themselves instead, generation after generation, becoming creatures uniquely suited to live in a wide range of environments. Imagine an evening 3 million years ago. The sun has slipped below the horizon,
painting the sky with fading streaks of red. A small band of humans sits quietly on a rocky ledge, bellies full after hours spent chewing roots and fruits. In the gathering darkness, they press close, listening for distant growls. There is no fire to keep them warm, no torch to scare away predators. One adult stays awake, scanning the shadows, while others drift into light sleep, ready to wake at the slightest snap of a twig. Their muscles are lean, their faces heavy with brow ridges, their hands strong but clumsy by modern standards. Yet in those hands and minds lie the seeds of the future, seeds shaped by endless struggle, honed by hunger and fear and patient adaptation. Over millennia, these small changes accumulated. Brains became large enough to plan hunts rather than merely stumble upon them. Hands became dexterous enough to shape stones into tools, crude at first, but revolutionary all the same. Faces flattened as the jaw shrank, because they no longer needed to crush tough plants all day. The rib cage narrowed, the gut shrank, freeing energy for the brain's voracious needs. These changes were slow, almost imperceptible in any single lifetime, but relentless as the turning of the earth. Even as bodies evolved, the lack of artificial light continued to define human life. Darkness was not simply an inconvenience, it was a presence, a force that governed behavior. Humans learned to read the stars for guidance, to notice the phases of the moon for timing their movements, to use dawn and dusk as natural signals. Their eyes adapted for low light, though not as powerfully as nocturnal hunters. They did not try to banish the dark, they survived by respecting it. The long road of evolution is written in fossils and bones, but it is also written in the story of endurance. Without cooked food, humans learned to seek the richest raw calories. Without warmth, they learned to move. Without light, they learned to rely on each other. These were not inventions. They were instincts carved into flesh and mind by countless generations of trial and error. By the time fire finally arrived, humans were already astonishing survivors, capable of thriving in environments that would seem impossible to us today. Imagine a final scene at the dawn of humanity's next chapter. A child sits beside her mother, gnawing on a piece of fibrous tuber. Around them, others chew in silence, the rhythm of jaws filling the evening air. Their faces are turned toward the setting sun, their eyes already adjusting to the darkness. Somewhere in their future, fire will come, and light will push back the night. But tonight they know nothing of it. They are strong without it, clever without it, and united without it. Their bodies and brains, shaped by millions of years of challenge, are ready for whatever comes next. And that readiness, that quiet strength, is the true story of the long road of evolution. To understand who we were before fire, before tools sharpened enough to shape the earth, it helps to look not only at our own bones buried in the ground, but at the creatures who still live in the world as we once did. When scientists peer into the forests where chimpanzees forage, where gorillas rest in nests of leaves, or where bonobos groom one another under dappled sunlight, they are peering into a living window of our distant past. These modern primates are not our ancestors, they are our cousins, shaped by their own long histories, but they reveal habits and instincts that run so deep they must have existed in the beings we came from. In their lives we can see echoes of a time when humans were not human as we know them, but simply another species of ape surviving in a dangerous and unpredictable world. Imagine an early morning deep in an African forest. A troop of chimpanzees wakes in the trees where they have woven sturdy sleeping nests from branches. They descend in the cool air, moving carefully, staying close in small family groups. The young cling to their mother's fur, learning by watching. These chimpanzees have no fire, no weapons of iron, no language like ours, and yet they live with strategies carved into them by evolution, strategies that may have been just as familiar to our ancestors millions of years ago. They spend the day searching for food, using sticks to fish termites from the soil, or crack open insect nests. They peel fruit with nimble fingers, bite into raw leaves, and on rare, brutal occasions they hunt small monkeys, sharing meat in tense bursts of excitement. When a chimp cracks a nut with a stone, or uses a leaf to sip water from a hollow, we are reminded that ingenuity did not begin with us. These behaviors tell us something about how our ancestors must have lived before the controlled use of fire changed everything. Like modern primates, they probably relied heavily on raw plants, nuts, roots, and scavenged flesh. They likely spent long hours foraging, because without cooking to soften food and release more energy, the human digestive system had to work harder to gain enough calories. When we see a chimp chewing tough fibrous leaves for minutes at a time, we glimpse how early humans might have spent entire afternoons grinding plants between strong jaws, their days governed by hunger and the search for nourishment. But food is only part of the story. Modern primates show us how deeply social life is etched into the bones of our kind. Chimpanzees groom one another constantly, picking insects from fur, cleaning wounds, soothing tensions with gentle touches. Gorillas huddle together for warmth and security at night. Bonobos form bonds through play, sharing, and even reconciliation rituals after conflict. These behaviors echo something ancient, the understanding that survival does not depend on strength alone, but on community. Early humans, long before they learned to speak as we do, must have relied on touch, on eye contact, on subtle sounds and gestures to maintain the fabric of their small groups. They survived not as lone wanderers but as families who kept close watch over each other, knowing instinctively that unity was protection against the unknown. When predators stalk the edges of the forest, chimpanzees give alarm calls, climbing trees or banding together to scare off leopards. They do not always succeed, many fall victim to sharper claws and stronger jaws, but their cooperative defense mirrors what our own ancestors likely did. Without fire to ward off danger, early humans may have used the same tactics. Loud voices, throwing sticks and stones, standing together in intimidating numbers. Watching primates today, we see that courage is not always individual heroism, but the shared will to stay alive. It's easy to imagine small bands of human ancestors gripping branches, huddling in the night as distant roars echoed across the savannah, finding strength in numbers, just as chimpanzees do when they patrol the edges of their territory in silent, tense groups. The clues go deeper still. Chimpanzees are not just opportunistic eaters, they are cultural beings. In different parts of Africa, chimps use different tools and teach them to their young. Some groups have mastered the cracking of nuts with stones. Others have learned to sharpen sticks to spear bush babies hidden in tree hollows. Still others fold leaves into sponges to sip from pools. These are learned traditions, not written down, but passed along by watching and imitating. This suggests that even before humans controlled fire, our ancestors were already capable of transmitting knowledge across generations. When a young chimp copies its mother's tool use, we see a glimmer of what early humans must have done, observing, imitating, and gradually refining skills that could make the difference between hunger and survival. Bonobos, close cousins of chimps, give us another perspective. They live in environments with fewer large predators and more plentiful food, and as a result they are less aggressive, more playful, and more cooperative. They share food freely, use affection to resolve conflict, and travel together with less fear. This contrast tells us something about how environment shapes behavior, and how our ancestors' lives, dominated by scarcity and danger, might have been far harsher than those of the gentle bonobo. It also shows that the capacity for peace, empathy, and sharing is not uniquely human. It is part of our biological inheritance, waiting to emerge when conditions allow. Gorillas, too, offer lessons. They are primarily plant eaters, relying on abundant vegetation to sustain massive bodies. They show how a primate can thrive without tools or fire, simply by knowing the rhythms of the forest. But gorillas also remind us that size and strength do not guarantee safety. Even they are wary of leopards, and keep close to the dominant silverback who leads the group. In this, we see how early humans might have looked to leaders, not as rulers in the modern sense, but as protectors whose experience guided the band. Leadership in primate groups is often based not just on strength, but on the ability to mediate conflict and keep harmony, an echo of the roots of human social order, long before villages and kings. By studying how primates heal themselves, we also glimpse ancient metas. Chimpanzees swallow certain bitter leaves to expel parasites, and mothers teach their young which plants are safe to eat and which are not.
This suggests that even before humans discovered fire to cook away toxins, they may have known instinctively, or learned by trial and error, which natural remedies could ease pain or illness. When we watch a chimp carefully selecting a medicinal plant, we are watching a thread of knowledge that may have stretched back to our shared ancestors 6 or 7 million years ago. Perhaps the most haunting clue comes from the way primates interact with death. Chimpanzees grieve. When an infant dies, its mother may carry the small body for days, unable to let go. Other group members gather around, sometimes silent, sometimes agitated, showing signs of stress. Gorillas guard their dead for hours. These moments of raw emotion remind us that early humans too must have felt the weight of loss long before they could speak of it, or light fires to ward off the night. They were not unfeeling creatures. They loved, they feared, they mourned. Evolution shaped them, as surely through these bonds as through the hunt for food or the need for shelter. Modern primates do not live exactly as our ancestors did. Millions of years have changed them too, but their behavior is a mirror polished just enough to show us where we came from. When scientists spend months in the forest, watching chimps teach their children, watching them strategize hunts or share fruit, they are piecing together a picture of human origins more vivid than fossils alone can give. A broken bone in ancient rock tells us a human ancestor once lived. A living chimpanzee using a stick to dig honey tells us how that ancestor may have thought. The combination of these clues lets us imagine life in the deep past, not as a blank void, but as a vibrant, dangerous, intelligent existence without any of the technologies we now take for granted.